A man walks into a bar and disappears without a trace. A hiker vanishes on a well-worn trail in broad daylight. And a pilot reports a UFO before he's never heard from again. These are real disappearances that were never fully explained. In July 2007, Barbara Bolick was hiking in the Bitterroot Mountains in Montana with a friend named Jim Ramaker. He'd come to visit from California. They're making their way toward a spot called Bear Creek Overlook. About 45 minutes into the hike, Jim stopped for less than a minute to check out the view. Barbara was right behind him, maybe 20 or 30 feet back. When he turned around to keep walking, she wasn't there. There had been no yell, no sound of someone falling. There was nothing. Jim called out for her for a long time before he went back down to get help, and what followed was one of the biggest search and rescue operations Montana had ever seen. Helicopters with thermal cameras, tons of ground teams. They covered the area for weeks, and they found absolutely nothing. Not a piece of gear, not a footprint, not a thread from her clothes. Investigators turned to her friend Jim. And understandably, he was the last one to have seen her, but he cooperated with everything. He passed a lie detector test, and they just couldn't find any evidence directly tying him to her disappearance. What happened? The trail wasn't dangerous, there were no hidden drop-offs or cliffs nearby. The amount of time it takes to glance at your phone, how did a fit, experienced hiker disappear from a trail in the middle of the day without making a single sound? Frederick Valentich was a 20-year-old pilot flying a small Cessna 182 for a stretch of water in Australia called the Bass Strait in 1978. While he was up in the air one evening, he got on the radio with Melbourne Air Traffic Control and asked if there were any other planes in his area. He said he could see something big with 4 bright lights on it, moving fast above him. When the controller told him there was nothing on the radar, Valentich said the thing seemed to be messing with him, circling his plane and moving in ways normal aircraft just don't move. He described it as shiny and metallic with a green light on top. Then he said his engine was starting to cut out. His last radio transmission was 17 seconds long. Most of it was just this weird metallic scraping sound that nobody's been able to explain. In his last actual sentence, "It's above me and it's not an aircraft." They searched thousands of square miles of ocean and found nothing. Some people say he might have gotten disoriented and flipped the plane upside down, mistaking his own lights in the water for something above him, but that doesn't explain the weird metallic sound recorded on the transmission, and it doesn't explain why there was zero debris. It's one of the most well-documented aviation mysteries out there, and it's still unsolved. In 1955, a 70-foot wooden boat called MV Joyita left Samoa with 25 people on board. The ship was basically designed to stay afloat no matter what. It was packed with cork lining and empty fuel drums. It was supposed to arrive at its destination in 2 days, but it never showed up. A search went out and found nothing. Then 5 weeks later, someone spotted the ship drifting in the ocean, about 600 miles off course, tilted to one side and partially underwater. When people climbed aboard, it was completely empty. The cargo was gone, the lifeboats were gone, but here's the part that really gets under people's skin. The ship's clocks had all stopped at 10:25. The radio was set to the emergency distress channel, but no one had ever picked up a signal from it. And on the deck there was a doctor's bag with used bandages and surgical tools laid out, but no signs of people. The ship was still floating, it was perfectly fine. If everyone had just stayed on board, they would have been fine too, but for some reason, 25 people decided to get off a boat that wasn't going down. Nobody knows why, and nobody has ever been found. Granger Taylor grew up on Vancouver Island and dropped out of school because he thought it was just too slow. He wasn't a slacker, he was genuinely gifted with machines. He'd take planes and trucks that other people had given up on and rebuild them from scratch. At some point, he got really into the idea of space and extraterrestrials, and he built a full-size flying saucer out of 2 satellite dishes in his backyard. He also told people he was receiving messages in his head from aliens. Well, one night in November of 1980, during a big storm, he left a note for his parents. It said he was leaving to board an alien spacecraft, and he would be gone for 42 months to travel through the solar system. He left behind his money and his belongings, got in his truck, and drove away. Nobody ever saw him again. And years later, some bone pieces and parts from his truck were found in the woods a few miles away. It looked like some kind of explosion had happened, but the fragments were never conclusively identified as his, and Whatever caused that blast didn't look like a typical car accident. In 1988, a Chicago sports journalist named Keith Reinhard was going through a rough patch in his life and decided to take off and write a novel. He moved to a tiny town in Colorado called Silver Plume and rented a space that had previously been used by a man named Tom Young. Tom Young had disappeared a year earlier while walking his dog. Reinhard found the story fascinating. He started writing Young into his book. Not long after Reinhard settled in, Young's body turned up in the mountains. Turned out he'd been shot. Well, instead of shaking Reinhard up, it seemed to make him even more fixated on the whole story. Then on August 7th, 1988, the day after a memorial service was held for Young, Reinhard told some friends he was going to hike up Pendleton Mountain. He was wearing light clothes and nothing on him for an overnight trip or bad weather, so it was strange that he was heading out at dusk. He never came back. Hundreds of volunteers searched for months and didn't find a single thing. Exactly what happened? Nobody knows, but for whatever reason, a man disappeared while writing a book about another man who disappeared in the exact same place. In February 1979, 5 guys from Maui took a small boat called the Sarah Joe out for a fishing trip. The weather was fine when they left, but a storm came out of nowhere. The Coast Guard searched over 70,000 square miles of ocean over several days, and they found nothing. The boat, the men, it was all gone. Everyone assumed the storm sank them, but almost 10 years later, in 1988, a group of biologists doing field work out in the Marshall Islands, which are more than 2,000 miles from Hawaii, came across a wrecked boat on a deserted island. It was the Sarah Joe. Nearby, they also found a grave. Someone had dug it, placed a wooden cross on top, and inside were the remains of one of the 5 men, a guy named Scott Moorman. A neat stack of blank papers had been placed over his bones. Nobody knows who made that grave. The island was completely uninhabited. And nobody knows what happened to the other 4 men. If Moorman survived the trip across the ocean, he couldn't have buried himself. And if he was already dead, someone else did it. But that someone has never been identified. Jim Thompson was an American businessman who basically brought the Thai silk industry back from the dead. He had a background in intelligence work and had spent years in Southeast Asia. Well, in 1967, he was on vacation with friends in the Cameron Highlands in Malaysia, staying at a place called the Moonlight Bungalow. On Easter Sunday, he went for a walk in the jungle nearby. He knew the area well, was in good shape, and liked being outdoors. But he went missing. The search for him was the biggest Malaysia had ever organized. Over 500 people spent 11 days looking there, and there were some very experienced trackers in the crew, but no luck. Did it have something to do with his spy background? Maybe. Others thought he planned the whole thing himself. The jungle in that area, it's not massive, it's a manageable size, so for trackers as skilled as these guys to come up completely empty-handed, it's genuinely hard to explain. In December 1946, an 18-year-old college student named Paula Welden told her roommate she was going for a hike on the long trail in Vermont. There were other people on the trail that day, including an older couple who were walking about 100 yards behind her. They watched her reach a bend in the trail near some rocks. They were right behind her. When they got to that same spot a few seconds later, though, she was gone. When she didn't come back to campus, a huge search was launched. They checked farms, caves, old wells, everything, but they didn't find her. Paula's disappearance is the most well-known of 5 people who vanished in that same patch of woods between 1945 and 1950. The FBI eventually got involved and still couldn't make sense of it. She seemingly walked around a corner on a trail right in front of 2 witnesses and was just never seen again. Back in 1763, in a small English town called Shepton Mallet, there was a man named Owen Parfitt who was in his 60s and had suffered a stroke. It left him almost completely unable to move on his own. He lived with his sister, who took care of him every day. One warm afternoon, she and a neighbor helped him out of bed and set him up in a chair on the front porch so he could get some fresh air. They wrapped him in a heavy coat. His sister went inside to do some chores. The whole time, there were also workers fixing a fence across the road, less than 50 yards away. About 15 minutes later, she came back outside. The chair was empty. Owen was gone. The workers said nobody had come near the house, and they hadn't seen Owen move at all. People searched the whole town and the surrounding area right away. He was nowhere to be found. But how? The man could barely move. He couldn't have walked off on his own. And if someone had taken him, there would have had to be a struggle. The workers would have noticed being right across the road. It's gotta be one of the strangest missing persons cases in England's history. On April 1st, 2006, a 27-year-old med student named Brian Shaffer went out for a night at a bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloon in Columbus, Ohio. Security cameras caught him outside the entrance around 1:15 in the morning, chatting with two women. He heads back inside, and then that's it. That's the last anyone ever saw of him. Here's the thing about this bar. It was on the second floor of a building that was being renovated. Because of all the construction, there's literally only one way in and out, an escalator with a camera pointing right at it. Investigators went through every single frame of that footage. They watched every person who went into that bar walk back out. Every single person except Brian. Police brought in dogs and searched the whole building top to bottom. No sign of him. To this day, the case is still unsolved. That's been the video. I will catch you, yes you specifically, in the next one.